So I kind of clicked it off a little bit there. Let's put a little drum beat behind it so that you can really feel that, because it comes in on that upbeat. So, a couple of special things going on here in terms of how I'm thinking about pedaling it. I'm really connecting these chords where you have the tenuto over the C minor 7. I'm definitely using the pedal to give me a little space to get ready for the next chord. And I'm hitting that M beat as I let up on the pedal. And then the same thing when I'm sitting on this E flat. That's unpedaled so that I can get that cleanliness of articulation in the bass. But then I'm holding all of that with the pedal before I get ready to loop around. And I just let off the pedal to let it go. But my hands are in place to get back to the top of the lick. The thing is that this doesn't really, obviously where I got the excerpt from, that where it loops back to is not the first bar. So, but it doesn't really matter because that same principle would apply. I mean, you're sitting here hanging onto these notes. There's no reason that your hands need to be holding these notes. The pedal's going to make it sound the exact same way. So if that gives you time to get your hands somewhere else, definitely do that. All right, let's jump on to this, the second lick here. Okay, so this one, for me, the biggest thing I'm working on here is the octaves and having to not look. Now, with left-hand octaves, I can mostly, not doing so well there, I can mostly find, I say as I'm screwing this up talking, I can mostly find, generally, these octaves in my left hand without looking sometimes. Or at least I'm better at my left hand. The real problem is this little spot in my right hand, because this is a big old leap here from, I've got my pinky here, and it's got to jump all the way up there. What's actually happening in my head to work toward this, I'm not there yet, is I'm thinking about this finger, and I know where this is, and I know how big an octave is in my hand. So from here, I'm thinking about that distance, which is an octave, and I can feel that. And then I'm thinking about where this pinky is and putting my thumb there and then doing the octave again. So it's really fast in my head going from this to that. And obviously you just have to get to where all of those steps happen almost instantaneously. And I'm, like I said, I'm not there yet, but that's the thought process behind it. So let's look at let's throw some drums behind this. Okay, so this is all a style thing. It's kind of a black spiritual type tune. I've got a real, in the wind world, you would call it slur to tongue to. So you're basically smearing down into that, and then you're kind of abruptly, at least in the melody, the second note of each one is very staccato. Whether or not you wanted to connect the bass, because a lot of times out of that, your bass is going to be a really, and you want it to be connected all the way through. So that's kind of your decision if you want to do that. But I'm still playing very staccato over in my right hand, and not a lot of pedaling here, just enough to get where I need to be. I also found when I was sight reading this, I think I found something weird about that carryover. It's not hard to me now because I've practiced it a little bit. Just holding that E flat. Now, the thing is, if you're playing this, nobody's going to notice if you re-articulate that. Like, it doesn't matter, especially for people who are accompanists. Like, it just doesn't matter that much. That's a thing that matters more for, like, organ playing, but it's good to get good at practicing that stuff. So let's move on to the next one. All right, let's look at this third excerpt. let's see if I can play those with some drums. Okay, so where I'm having the most trouble is in this bar with the octave triads. Hey, welcome to that again, always. But what's important here is stylistically, I want everything, I want all of that very connected. So I'm using some pedal to connect that as much as possible. The problem is you really want some cleanness in this bass line. And it's hard for me to get that. You've got to get this, let's see, I'd let the pedal there and go there. So really the second from beat 2 to 3 has to be really smooth with as close to a finger legato as possible. And I'm not quite getting it in time. The other thing that's not as much of a problem for me is in that third bar, you really want to have that space in there. All right, so let's look at this fourth one. This is where we really start to get in the weeds. Okay, so this has all kinds of crazy rhythms. Let's see if I can play this over a drum track real quick. Okay, I had a little mistake in there, but no, for the most part, you get the feel of it. And it really, this is one where the groove sets in really well. When you put it over some drums, you can feel it. Now, if you're actually accompanying this, you're not going to have that, but it's good to understand the kind of groove that you would put this over. So man, where do I even start with this? This has a lot going on. So first of all, you're starting this excerpt with nothing on the downbeat. So you really have to feel those triplets. Dee da da dee da dee da 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 da. But then you just have to drop out the first bit. So 1, 2, ready, go. And then the other thing is your top note is just tied all the way across. So you're only moving those notes while holding this B flat. Now, it doesn't matter that much. Who's going to hear it? Like, don't worry. Like, from a practical standpoint, you can get away with it. I mean, that should be a theme generally. If you're accompanying, it just doesn't matter that much. There's a lot you can get away with. As long as you're laying down the harmonic framework and you're laying down the feel, it doesn't matter so much the notes that are on the page. It's good to work on it for technical reasons, but don't get too worried about it. And then if you're using this for just comping patterns and improvisation, it really doesn't matter because no composer even wrote this down, so it doesn't matter. All right, so let's look at the second bar where things get really squirrely. If there's so many different things happening here in terms of rhythmic complexity that if you have any problems with counting and rhythm, this one just has too many things all combined that make it a problem. For one, you've got a bit of a 2 against 3, you have a partial triplet, and then you have a tie into that triplet. So that makes the rhythm complicated. So first of all, I would say take out the tie. What I tend to tell people when they're working on rhythm problems is pat it on your lap. Now, you can't see my lap because I don't have the camera set up that way, but I would say pat on your lap because that makes you not have to worry about notes. Don't worry about pitches. Don't worry about any of that. But for the sake of this, I'll just put, one note on piano. So I would say think about your, take out your tie first of all. And I would say duplicate whatever you have. Just go ahead and play eighth notes for the first 2 beats. 1 and then do a full triplet. Triplet 1 and dee da da dee da dee da da. And then try to take out that downbeat. So 1. Okay, my triplets are a little not perfect, but it doesn't matter for this style. It really doesn't, because the triplets are usually more in a swing feel anyway. Okay, so you've taken that out. Now see if you can add the triplet as written instead of the full triplet. So and then add the tie back in. So and if you're just listening and trying to think about that, that's not going to do much for you. You actually have to sit there and do the math and think about where the beats are. And then eventually you can add the notes. You can just pick 2 notes in either hand and do something like this so that you can get 1 and that kind of 1 and 1 and 1. You might even try to just do the triplet there. So you're thinking about that triplet. You really want to think the full triplet. So there I'm breaking the tie again, but I'm playing the rhythm from the left hand. And then let's add the tie back in. So you just play with it a couple of different ways until you can figure out that rhythm. And I think I'm actually playing this faster than what the marked tempo is. But then you can eventually start adding the notes back in. All right. Sorry. So it's really a rhythmically difficult thing to do. But it's worth working on because, it does groove. And then I would say let's look at the last bar. It's really important to get these articulations right. And I transcribed these as they were with the articulations marked. Not all articulations are marked. You probably noticed that on a previous excerpt with that slur to tongue to thing I was talking about. That's just a style thing you have to pick up. But this one, it's kind of explicitly marked, so you know you can't really lay on the pedal here. You really want to pop that. And then if you are going to loop this around, you definitely want to have that space coming back around into the first bar. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. Okay, so this 5th one is, it's technically easier than the previous ones. I would say on a rhythmic level, it's in some ways easier because it's mostly straight 8th notes. You don't have any weird triplet things, but man, there's something going on here. So let's look at it. So the thing is, you're getting this off-kilter thing where your beats aren't lining up where you expect them to. So I'm going to actually start the lick excerpt again. I'm going to give some sort of a straight 4. So let's. You get out of this straight 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and you suddenly get this 3 feel. It's basically overlaying almost like a 9/8. I think is basically what's happening. You're getting a 9/8 split across 2 and some change bars of 4/4. So it's a real mess. Let's see if I can actually count this out loud and play it. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 3. 2, 3 there at the end. So you see where the beats are, the implied accent beats are in a different place. So you've been booking along in this nice grooving 4. It's a very special thing happening there. This one, for people who are just looking for comping patterns, man, I don't know. Like this rhythmic idea is a cool thing you can do places. And I'm intentionally not going to do this with a drum track because there's no point. If you were playing this with the drummer would also go from this straight ahead and break into a triplet feel with you. That's how this would happen if you had a drummer. But for people who are just like accompanying or trying to prepare to be a better accompanist, looking to do accompaniment jobs in the future, these are the rhythms that, and on the previous one, these are the kinds of rhythms that I find that people who only have a classical background really struggle with. They can't get the feel, and they just have experienced so few of these kinds of rhythms and this kind of rhythmic weirdness that's only more in more contemporary music. I say contemporary, I mean, this is basically black spiritual music, sort of written and arranged from that idea. These polyrhythmic over multiple bar ideas definitely come from that Afro-Caribbean tradition. But no, like, these are the kinds of things that people who are mostly classically trained don't run into a lot, and they struggle a lot just reading them because the ties make this complicated to read. But then beyond that, it's getting the feel. It's so much about where you're putting the implied accent. So you really, in this case, just have to follow that left hand. You can see it's very clearly in groupings of 3. But yeah, that one's super fun. I like that. So let's move on. All right, so let's go ahead and look at this last one. This is mostly one I need to work on, keeping my eyes off of my hands. I'm getting there. Also, notice I think I rolled that last chord. We'll talk about that in a second. Let's see if I can put it over some drums. So you can get that feel a little better, especially for those upbeats. If you're playing this in the context of the piece that it was from, it's going to be fine. You're going to have this grooving along feel and then have this. For somebody who's comping, this is going to work fine because you'll probably be playing with other musicians. There's going to be a bass player or a drummer, somebody who's laying down that downbeat, and you're just grabbing this thing off the downbeat. If you're playing by yourself and you want to start something with this kind of feel, you probably want to lay down. You need to, at least for the very first time, you need to establish where that's at. And then you can start leading that space. But you definitely need to show where the beat's at, because otherwise people are going to feel like the rhythm starts in a different place. Even if you hear it in your head as starting on the end of one, that's not how a listener is going to hear it. This one's also just back to how I had rolled that chord that one time, and probably did a couple other times. That last chord, like I said, I transcribed these as they were, and these first 2 were rolled, and the last one's not. It doesn't matter. Roll it if you want. Like, that's kind of the thing. The rules are just not set in place, especially if you're comping. But even if you were accompanying, like, I can't think of any choir director who would yell at me because I rolled that last chord because I thought it sounded good. It doesn't matter that much. This is another one where you could simplify the voicings if you needed to, especially with those duplicated notes. That low E flat in the first chord, like, you don't need it. You could leave it out. Can you even hear the difference? It's barely audible, and especially if you're accompanying, like, if you're with a band, nobody's going to hear it. If you're playing with a group of kids singing, well, nobody's paying attention to the accompanist anyways. So if that's hard for you and you're going to miss because of it, maybe leave it out. I would say practice it for technical reasons, but maybe leave it out. Another thing that's interesting in this for me is these ninths that I can actually reach and hold. A lot of times when I have ninths, when I have tenths especially, I can't really hold a tenth. I mean, I did, but not practically. There's one later I'm working on that I keep working on it because due to where the pedaling's at, I just can't sustain the bottom note, and it sounds like crap. And I hate that that's the case, but that's just the way it is. But I so rarely run into ninths where I actually need to play ninths. It's just not a thing that comes up a lot, and where I roll and hold them. So getting used to just playing these ninths is useful for me here. But this also overall is just a great example of you can do whatever you want with these chords. You can voice them however you want. I actually caught myself making a mistake early on where I was playing that first chord in a different inversion because in my ear, didn't like that voice leading as much as I like this voice leading. I just feel like that's smoother than this. I don't like that. It's not really voice leading because that's a jump there, but I didn't like that sound as much. It doesn't matter. You can do whatever you want there. I could even make it, smaller. It's the same chord. So do what you want with that. There just aren't rules. People need to be more aware of that, especially for just comping, like in a contemporary sense. But even if you're playing this for a choir, like, unless you are specifically giving them pitches, it just doesn't matter that much. Now, sometimes that is the case. I will give that caveat. Sometimes there will be a case where you're playing this and say like in the first bar. So if I decided to revoice that D flat chord for some reason and voice it here, and not put the B flat on top, that could be a problem, because maybe the sopranos or the altos, they're expecting to get their pitch. They hear their pitch from that. Maybe they've practiced with a recording and they're used to hearing that at the top of that chord, and that's where they get a pitch for their entrance. That matters for an accompanist. It just doesn't matter almost anywhere else. And honestly, when you're working with really good choirs, it doesn't matter. I'm so lucky that I work with great choirs where I literally don't have to play anything on the page. I can just fuck up left and right, and it doesn't matter because the kids can keep going because they are good independent singers. That doesn't mean that should be acceptable. You don't want to mess up because it will throw off less capable, not just singers, but if you're working with vocalists instrumentalists, same thing. You don't want to do that. Be prepared, be a professional about it, but just be aware of those things. Specifically with singers, they need that. And then instrumentalists, a lot of times, they do need you to play certain entrances kind of verbatim because they're used to a recording, and when it sounds a little off from the recording, they get tilted. They can't figure out where their entrance is because, especially, high school kids, they're nervous. So anyway, those are just some tips, and I liked this group of licks. I think the next set of excerpts coming up is going to be the Latin ones that I've been working on. Oh man, they're really, really fun. So we'll get to that. All right, a little housekeeping. I decided to retitle the project and to clean up my document. Basically what these really are is they're accompaniment excerpts, so I think I'm going to relabel them as such, and I tried to just organize things a little better so that I can put in, I went back and put in the tempos that were marked on the accompaniments that I transcribed these from. The thing is, really, these initially were for me for practice, and then I shared them on my Patreon, and then I started putting them out there sort of as a set of comping practice tools, and they absolutely can be used as that, and that's something that I do, is I steal comping patterns that I find from these actual accompaniments. But realistically, people who are thinking about getting into proper accompanying, with choirs, there's a problem in that this is the material you'll be looking at, and you probably, if you have a very classical background, like today's a good example, you might not have run into some of these rhythms. This is kind of the level of the kind of accompaniment you'll be expected to look at, and honestly, the best accompanists can just sight read this stuff. But a lot of classical players, even if their sight reading is good, they have trouble with the styles. So this is a good resource for those people too. And I put, like I said, I went back in and put in those tempos because that also gives you an idea how fast they're marked to be. Now, I think today I played these all quite a bit faster because I kind of felt like they grooved and cooked a little faster than the marked tempo. But if you're going to be an accompanist, be capable of doing that. There are plenty of times that you need to be able to play it well above the marked tempo because that's just the tempo the director wants to go at, and that's your job, is to go their speed. And sometimes it'll be slower, sometimes it'll be faster. So you need to be able to do that. I also totally should have mentioned some things about chords. I went back and tried to put in some harmonic analysis. I'm trying to be better about putting in the harmonic analysis. mostly for the comping aspect of it, to look at it and be able to reverse engineer what's happening chord wise so that you can use that. So that somebody who was looking at this just as a comping exercise, they don't even need to look at the sheet music. They can just look at the chord symbols and play those chord symbols and try to comp maybe in the style of the excerpt, something like that, because you can get away with that as an accompanist too. And I frequently put in a harmonic analysis over certain spots in accompaniments that I'm doing, to make it easier. Now, one thing about this is I'll probably have to, like, at some point add a style guide to as a preface to this group of exercises, but I don't put every chord because that doesn't always matter. It's something to be aware of, that there, especially I think in the third excerpt today, there were a lot of places where there would be more chords, but realistically, from a comping perspective, they don't matter. They're not changing enough for you need to notate them explicitly in chord notation, because you would probably just comp 2 chords to the bar for, 1 chord to the bar, that kind of thing. You wouldn't be worrying about all the nitty-gritty details, especially at a quick tempo. You just need to give a framework, a harmonic framework. So those are just some thoughts that I had about this now that I've finished recording all of the all of the excerpts for today. And if anybody has any tips, I might need to slow down talking. I had some coffee right before I recorded these, and I feel like I'm talking a little fast. I'm definitely thinking a little fast. Much higher energy than the ones I recorded last week. But yeah, any feedback about things that you think could be better in terms of the organization of the document, anything about things you would like to see more details on in the video talking about, playing these things, or any tips that you want me to throw in, I'm happy to field any of those things. Be brutal, because that's what you need. You need brutal criticism. But yeah, also big thanks to my patrons, and I think I'm going to end it there.